I guess, that the European farmers are a bit more militant than we are in a lot of ways.
Yeah, quite a large bit more militant. In New Zealand, the farmers tend to be part of the establishment, but for some reason European farmers don't appear to be engaged so much in elective office and that sort of thing. So they're much more inclined to take to the streets, and we've just seen that with thousands of them demonstrating in Brussels over low commodity prices. Not really the fault of the European Union that they have low commodity prices. That affects everybody around the world, but nevertheless the Union has now decided to, I think it's 500 billion euro, which they're making available more to the farming community. It's a massive amount of money, and so the demonstration appears to have worked. But they're much more inclined.
Very well, I would have thought.
They're much more inclined to demonstrate. I mean, I recall some years ago French farmers turning over on the road, overturning truckloads of Spanish tomatoes because the Spaniards, for some reason, had the cheek to have spring earlier than the than the French, and their crop was indeed not allowed to do that. So they do tend to be a bit more aggressive and a bit more assertive. And sometimes Paris gets filled up with tractors, people driving tractors and protests and so on. That's just the way it's been, and farming because Europe has had its share of wars, thankfully none for some time, but food and food production and the certainty of food for the population is always very close to the mind of not just farmers but of urban policymakers as well, because the masses do have to be fed, and so most of the European Union budget and historically has been devoted to support for the farming sector, which our farmers, of course, have protested about, but haven't driven tractors into Paris over it.
You can't imagine the Fonterra suppliers suddenly hitting the streets of Christchurch and Auckland and Wellington and protesting, can you?
No, you can't. No. I mean, that's just the way it is. No, our farmers tend to be much more into the establishment. They tend to be good business people. Some of them take too big a risk and then they get bitten if the commodities are lower in price. But it's a different mindset from on the continent.
As far as the subsidies over there, obviously they're still very much alive and well.
Yes, they are, and they've had, as I understand it, and they have had production caps as well, so that they knew how much they could produce and they knew what their income would be. Recently, the European Union has indicated that it's lifting the production caps, and that's had a negative effect on milk prices, for example, around the world, because people now anticipate that there's going to be greater production than there has been. Just as with oil, they're anticipating now the Iran deal with the United States, Iranian oil will start to flow, so more downward pressure on oil prices, which will please farmers, of course.
Absolutely, but, please me as well.
Indeed.
I drive a six-cylinder car.
Oh, okay. Gosh, yeah, not me.
Is Russia still in that mix because of the closed gates?
Yes, it is. Yes, yeah. They are. In fact, they've been burning European Union products, milk products, which they found, cheese and that sort of thing. They've been setting a light to them because they're not supposed to be rorting the system. The European Union is punishing Russia for its annexation of Crimea, but some people in Russia like to import European cheese, and when they're found, they are punished. Yeah. So the Russians are now trying to get big deals with China. China is developing dairy farms, I think of 100,000 cows on the border towards Russia. Putin's been to Beijing. Xi Jinping has been to Moscow. But the downturn in the Chinese economy is damaging that cosy relationship a little bit.
But it would be a union that I would feel a bit uncomfortable about.
Yeah, well, generally they've been antagonistic towards one another. That was the great communist powers who fell out 50 years ago. Mao broke with Stalin, and their relationships never returned. They're basically watchful of each other, I think. But Putin has to find an outlet for Russian gas and oil. China is prepared to do that. He has to find alternatives to buy goods from to Western Europe. but the downturn in China's economy and its production, because nobody really believes the data coming out of China. It's you know,
oh, really?
Amazingly, they can produce the official stats miles ahead of anybody else in the world can do. So nobody really believes them. We do know that growth is slowing, and that's impacting the Chinese ability to provide Putin with the support he's looking for, having lost access to Western Europe.
And Kerry, this week Rainbow Warriors reared its head, and you were right in the middle of all that.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I was in the cabinet when we had to deal with the Rainbow Warrior, the tragedy of the fatality there. But as a small country, dealing with a powerful country within an even more powerful union in Europe, it was in our interests to have a settlement of that, and we approached, through the United Nations, we approached Ruud Lubbers, who was Prime Minister of the Netherlands. He acted as the arbitrator under the Secretary General of the UN, produced an arbitration which both governments agreed to, in which the French Prime Minister at the time, Chirac, apologised in English, very difficult for a French Prime Minister to apologise, paid money, our access to European markets was secured, and the final thing of that was that late one night after I'd had dinner with my sons in Christchurch, I went down to my mum's little cottage in Redcliffs, and as Minister of Immigration in the Longi government, at a few seconds after midnight, two very large police officers arrived, and I signed the deportation orders for Mafar and Prieur. Yeah.
So you really were right in there.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that was my role. It was we had to do it. Some people said, "Oh, we should have kept them in jail," but the bigger picture was we had to look after New Zealand's wider interests, and I think we did.
That's diplomacy at its best, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
International diplomacy, and nobody knew.
Nobody knew, no. Oh, they kind of knew something was going on, but nobody knew. And I was asked, what was I, by lots of journalists in Parliament, what are you doing? I'm just going out to Christchurch to have dinner with my sons, that's all.
Had to go and see your dear old mum.
It wasn't a lie, because I did have dinner with them.
Are we still that vulnerable? I guess we are, as far as international diplomacy is concerned.
Well, was it? Yeah, but we're a small player. Well, we're a medium-sized player. We're not. I mean, there's probably 100 countries smaller than New Zealand in population and landmass and that sort of thing. But we're a small player compared with a country of 60 or 70 million people, which is a highly industrialised country. It's got some economic woes of its own, but it's still a very strong nation. And de Gaulle exercised the veto to keep England, to keep Britain out of the European Union for some time. We did not want to be in a position where France was eternally hostile to New Zealand over that particular issue. So it was in our wider interest to get it settled, and we did.
And
much to our benefit, I must say.
Kerry, thank you very much indeed.